We often hear the saying that death is the ultimate equalizer, don't we?
We do. It's a common thought.
That no matter your wealth, your status, your background, in the end, well, it all comes to the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the realities we've encountered in our research suggest something, well, profoundly unsettling.
Yes, quite unsettling.
What if, in a truly macabre way, the value of a life after it's tragically lost depends entirely on how you die?
It's a startling proposition.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a central paradox we've uncovered: the vastly unequal compensation for loss of life right here in India.
A really significant issue.
It's a system where the amount of family receives for a loved one's death varies wildly, depending purely on the circumstances of their passing. It's almost like a lottery.
A death lottery, essentially.
Exactly. Our mission in this deep dive is to pull back the curtain on these stark disparities, reveal the hidden rules, the legal frameworks behind this grim reality.
And explore the profound questions it raises.
Yes, questions about how we value life itself. We've delved into numerous insights and reports to bring you the clearest, most compelling picture of this incredibly complex and, frankly, often heartbreaking issue.
It's certainly complex.
And when we say vastly different compensation, it's truly startling. I mean, just try to wrap your head around this.
The range is extreme.
On one hand, some families might receive compensation soaring up to 1.85 crore. Now that's, what, 10 million rupees per crore, so a huge amount.
A very significant sum, yes.
But then, for other families who have lost a loved one just as painfully, the compensation could be as little as 50,000 days. Or
in some cases, nothing at all.
nothing. That profound difference from, 1.85 crore down to zero,
Yeah,
it really challenges our perception of equal value, doesn't it?
absolutely. It forces us to ask difficult questions.
From your analysis, what are the primary legal or systemic mechanisms driving this incredible disparity?
Well, it's striking to note that these vast differences aren't random. They're not arbitrary. They're deeply rooted in a complex, often fragmented web of laws. You've got international agreements rubbing up against a patchwork of national regulations.
So different legal layers involved.
Precisely. The compensation landscape for death across the country is far from uniform. It's really a stark reflection of how different scenarios are legislated and maybe how they're prioritized.
Prioritized. That's an interesting word choice.
Well, yes, because this isn't just an oversight. It often reflects how different government ministries and legislative bodies operate, sometimes in silos.
Working independently, not necessarily together.
Exactly, creating this complex bureaucracy that can resist a singular, cohesive approach to compensating victims' families.
Okay, let's really unpack these numbers then, because the examples truly highlight the scale of this disparity.
The figures tell a story.
We see these massive payouts for air crash victims, which almost feel like they belong to a different universe compared to the sums for, say, a train accident victim or someone who died because of a pothole.
The contrast is dramatic.
It's a contrast that, frankly, makes you scratch your head.
Yeah.
Can you guide us through some of the most striking examples we found?
Absolutely. The compensation amounts are directly tied to specific legal frameworks we've analyzed. So let's start with air crashes.
Okay, the high end.
Right. Here, the compensation can indeed be significant, potentially reaching up to that 1.85 crore figure we mentioned.
And why so high?
It's largely mandated by international agreements, specifically the Montreal Convention of 1999, which India ratified back in 2009.
An international standard.
Correct. So, for example, after the tragic Air India Flight AI171 crash on June 22, 2025, which claimed 242 lives, the families were initially offered 1 crore ex gratia.
Ex gratia meaning?
Meaning it's an initial sort of voluntary payment from the airline or government, separate from what they might be legally entitled to.
Got it.
But their full legal entitlements under that Montreal Convention could actually push the final figure even higher, potentially up to the 1.85 crore mark, depending on court rulings and specific factors like the victim's age and earning potential.
So international law sets a high baseline there.
It does. Now, compare that to train accidents.
Okay.
The situation changes drastically. Here, the compensation is generally fixed at 8 lakhs.
8 lakhs compared to potentially 1.85 crore. That's a huge drop.
A massive drop. And this is regulated by the Railways Act of 1989. Now, states might offer an additional amount, maybe 5 lakhs, but it's not guaranteed.
Oh, it's standard.
No. And this figure really brings the human cost into focus when you consider the statistics. Our data shows around 7 deaths daily just from Mumbai local train accident.
Daily, 7 people a day.
Yes, which totals about 3,000 annually, just in that one context. A staggering loss of life, compensated at a comparatively much lower standard rate.
That's truly sobering. Okay, what about road accidents? That must be even more common.
It is, and the compensation landscape there is even more varied and, frankly, less predictable.
How so?
Payouts often range somewhere between 2 lakhs and 5 lakhs. But this figure heavily depends on the specifics of the case, the state laws under the Motor Vehicles Act, and often involves lengthy legal processes.
So even less certain for families than train accidents.
Generally, yes. And often lower payouts, definitely far less certain than the air crash scenario.
Okay. And then there was another category that really stood out. Potholes.
Ah, yes. Pothole deaths. This is perhaps the starkest reality we found in our research.
How many lives were we talking about?
These incidents claim about 2,342 lives annually across the country.
Over 2,000 people a year dying because of potholes.
Yes. And yet, there's typically no standard compensation whatsoever.
None.
Generally, no standard governmental compensation scheme specifically for pothole deaths. Families might try to sue municipal bodies, but it's difficult, often unsuccessful, and certainly not standard.
Wow. That really begs the question about accountability, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. For families, the feeling of neglect, of being completely unsupported after such a profound loss due to essentially infrastructure failure, it must be immense.
Just left completely adrift.
It seems that way in many cases. And if we look at the recent past, think about COVID-19 deaths.
Right. Another huge loss of life. What was the situation there?
The central government approved 50,000 euro per death. This was under the National Disaster Management Act of 2005.
50,000 rupees.
Yes. What's crucial to note here, though, is that the law itself actually allows for up to 4 lakhs for relief in such disasters.
So they could have given much more under the existing law.
Potentially, yes. But the approved amount was significantly less. This likely reflected various financial constraints and political decisions made at the time.
Were there any variations?
Some states did step in. Karnataka, for example, offered 1 lakh for underprivileged families who lost someone to COVID. But the implementation and actual reach of these state-level schemes varied widely across the country.
So again, inconsistent.
Very inconsistent. And beyond these major categories, there are others we explored briefly.
Like what?
Terror attacks, for instance. Compensation varies significantly depending on the incident and government announcements. For the Pulwama attack in 2019, 10 lakhs was provided per family of the security personnel killed.
Case by case, then.
Largely. Workplace accidents are another area. Compensation there varies according to the victim's wages, and it's governed by the Employees' Compensation Act of 1923. The liability falls on the employer based on income and circumstances.
So tied to earnings.
Yes. And finally, natural disasters. Compensation might be around 1 lakh, but again, this varies hugely by state and the specific disaster. Think back to the 2004 tsunami. The responses differed across affected regions.
It's truly a baffling panorama of values assigned after death, isn't it?
It is profoundly uneven.
It almost makes you think, and this is a dark thought, obviously we're joking, but if you want your family to, quote, win big in this awful lottery, maybe book a flight instead of taking the train.
It's a grim way to put it, but yes, it underscores the sheer absurdity of the situation. The human cost is immeasurable, of course.
Of course. Or thinking about those pothole deaths. You know, potholes, they're the silent killers. They don't discriminate based on who you are.
No, they don't.
Yet, the system compensates essentially no one as a standard practice. It's almost like the system is shrugging and saying, sorry about that pothole, just bad luck.
It can certainly feel that way for the families left behind. A profound sense of injustice.
Is there any argument or any systemic reason that our analysis points to for why these cases, like the pothole deaths, fall through the cracks so consistently?
That's a crucial point, and it goes back to the fragmentation we discussed.
Right.
The underlying reasons for these disparities are complex, but one primary factor is indeed that difference between international standards and national laws.
So the Montreal Convention effect again.
Exactly. International agreements like that often mandate significantly higher compensation standards, particularly for air travel, because it's inherently international.
Setting a global bar.
Yes. Whereas national laws for other causes of death trains, roads, potholes often simply don't match that standard. They might be older, less robust, or just not uniformly applied across the country.
And you mentioned a lack of a unified policy.
Yes, that's a key takeaway from our research. There's a significant lack of a unified national policy that covers all these different death scenarios equitably.
So it's just a patchwork.
It really is. Instead of a cohesive framework, you see this patchwork where each cause of death falls under different acts, often enacted decades apart, with different provisions, different priorities driving them.
Is it just legislative inertia? Things just stay the way they are?
That's certainly part of it. You have these disparate laws layered on top of each other over decades, and it makes creating a truly equitable system incredibly difficult without a major overhaul.
And what about accountability? You mentioned that regarding potholes.
Yes, and perhaps most critically, our analysis does reveal a significant accountability gap. Research indicates that officials often face no personal consequences for negligence, even in cases like pothole-related deaths, where their inaction or the agency's inaction might have directly contributed to fatalities.
So no one is held responsible.
Not in a way that forces systemic change, often. Without that direct personal or institutional accountability, the incentive for preventative measures or for ensuring equitable compensation frameworks simply isn't strong enough to overcome that bureaucratic inertia we just discussed.
So if it's primarily about fragmented laws, this inertia, and a lack of accountability, does our understanding point to any specific historical reason for why the laws are so fragmented? Or is it just systemic neglect piling up over time?
It's likely a combination of both, really. Historically, laws often pop up in response to specific high-profile tragedies or as industries develop.
Reactive rather than proactive.
Exactly. Air travel, being inherently cross-border, was always going to bump into international conventions, demanding some uniformity.
Makes sense.
But road and rail laws, they develop more domestically, often piecemeal at state and central levels at different times, addressing different immediate concerns.
And nobody stopped to connect the dots.
Well, over time, instead of consolidating and harmonizing these different laws based on a core principle of valuing life equally, new rules often just got added. There wasn't necessarily a foundational reevaluation.
So it's less a deliberate decision to say one life is worth less than another.
Probably not deliberate in that sense, no. It seems more a consequence of this reactive policymaking, coupled with that persistent accountability gap we talked about.
This truly begs an important, deeply ethical question for all of us listening, doesn't it?
It really does.
Are we, as a society, inadvertently putting different price tags on human lives based purely on the manner of death?
That's the uncomfortable question the data forces us to confront.
It feels almost unconscionable to think that the intrinsic worth of a human life could be tied to something as arbitrary as how they died, yet the legal and compensation frameworks seem to suggest exactly that.
The outcomes certainly point that way.
So what can be done? Where do we go from here to address these stark disparities?
Okay, this brings us to potential paths forward that our research highlights. And one of the most prominent ideas, one that makes a lot of sense from an equity standpoint, is pushing for a uniform policy.
A single standard?
Or at least a more consistent approach. Instead of this lottery system, compensation could potentially be tied to something more rational, like income.
How would that work?
For example, one proposal is a fixed multiple, say 20 times the annual earnings of the person who died.
Okay, give us an example.
Sure. So if someone earns 5 lakhs a year, their family would receive 1 crore under this model. If they earn 1 lakh a year, the family gets 20 lakhs.
So it scales with income, providing a baseline tied to economic loss, but in a standardized way.
Precisely. It would introduce a level of fairness and predictability that is just completely missing right now.
That sounds logical. What else?
Another crucial aspect is promoting insurance, making sure people have access to affordable life insurance.
Like government schemes.
Exactly. Schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana are vital here. This particular scheme offers 2 lakhs cover in case of death from any cause.
And how much does that cost?
The yearly premium is just 436, very affordable.
So that could provide a basic safety net.
It could. While Eurolax might not match the highest compensations we've discussed, it can significantly bridge gaps, especially for vulnerable populations who often fall through the cracks of the current system entirely.
Right. Ensuring at least some support.
Yes. Promoting such schemes, making people aware of them, ensuring they can access them, that can ensure a basic level of financial support is available to almost every family, regardless of the cause of death.
Okay, a uniform policy, better insurance penetration.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yes, and this is perhaps the most fundamental long-term solution: investment in safety, tying prevention directly to compensation.
How do you mean?
It's about shifting the focus. Instead of just reacting with compensation after a tragedy, proactively investing to prevent the deaths in the first place.
So better infrastructure.
Better infrastructure, absolutely. Building safer, more resilient roads, ensuring proper maintenance, upgrading train systems, enforcing safety regulations more strictly.
Basically making things safer so fewer people die needlessly.
Exactly. This isn't just about funding, though. It's about embedding safety as a core governmental priority across all sectors, a cultural shift towards proactive risk mitigation.
And the connection to compensation.
Well, fewer preventable deaths means less need for compensation in the first place. It addresses the root cause, not just the symptom.
These solutions, a uniform policy, promoting insurance, robust investment in safety, they sound incredibly logical, especially from an equity standpoint.
They address the core issues identified.
But what are the biggest hurdles? Politically? Practically? Implementing such sweeping changes in a country as vast and complex as India must be difficult.
Oh, absolutely. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Or the multi-crore question, maybe.
Perhaps. Political will is a major hurdle, no doubt. Unifying disparate laws under one umbrella means overcoming significant bureaucratic resistance from various ministries, each protective of its own turf.
Bureaucratic battles.
Yes, and potentially reallocating budgets, which is always politically charged. There's also the sheer financial implication. A truly uniform, higher compensation standard would require significant government expenditure or finding new funding mechanisms.
Money is always an issue.
Always. And while a uniform policy tied to income makes logical sense in some ways, it also means openly acknowledging and basing compensation on income disparities, which itself can be politically sensitive territory.
Tricky waters to navigate.
It's a complex dance between the ideals of equity, the demands of practicality, and the realities of political feasibility.
So when we boil it all down, this isn't just about the payouts, the rupees and lakhs themselves, is it?
No, it goes much deeper than that.
It seems to be about something more fundamental.
Yeah.
A broader societal investment in keeping citizens safe, first and foremost.
Yes, prevention is key.
In ensuring dignity for every single life lost. And creating a system that truly reflects the equal value of every individual, regardless of their circumstance or, how tragically they met their end.
That's the ultimate goal, or should be.
Okay, so to summarize what we've uncovered today, India faces this really complex, ethically challenging situation where compensation for death varies wildly.
Creating that grim death lottery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Based purely on circumstance, not intrinsic human value. We've seen how international laws, fragmented national policies, inconsistent state actions, and a lack of uniform standards all feed into this deeply unsettling reality.
It's clearly a systemic issue, not just isolated incidents.
Absolutely. Our analysis shows it requires more than just patching up individual cases. It needs a fundamental rethink.
Agreed.
So here's a thought for you, our listeners, to ponder long after this deep dive ends. When a life is lost, the profound grief, the unimaginable pain, that is truly universal, isn't it?
Grief doesn't discriminate.
No. But in a system where the compensation for that loss is so incredibly unequal, what does that truly say about how we, as a society, actually value human life in practice?
It's a difficult mirror to look into.
It is. And what responsibility do we all share in pushing for a future where every life, regardless of its end, is equally valued, equally protected, and treated with the same dignity? Something to reflect on, certainly.